Figure out a way to make me look about 10 years younger, 50 years younger, then I'm good. That's all right. I need a filter. I need a filter. I need a give me a little tan or something.
Yeah, right.
Tango Shalom, what's that?
Oh, Tango Shalom was a little movie that I helped with. It was a funny. It's a heartfelt film, but it's about a Hasidic rabbi who gets into some financial trouble, and his only way out is to win this tango dancing competition. But of course, being a Hasidic rabbi, you're not allowed to touch women, so there's a number of challenges.
I like it already. Yeah, it's perfect. You could play a Hasidic rabbi. You definitely.
I'm starting to work on that. Yeah. I don't know if the tattoos will fly, but
I don't know.
They wear long sleeves, so
that's true. You can't. Yeah. I was worried about the tattoos too. I was just thinking, oh, poor guy. Can't be buried where his parents are.
No, they're gonna have to put me in the Goy parking lot over on the other side. But they told me you can, but they'll cut them off, and I'm like, I don't like that.
Really? Is that what they'll do?
Yeah, they'll cut off the tattoos. And I'm like,
What about Adam Levine? They'd
right.
have to cut off his whole body.
Forest Lawn Cemetery. That's
That's where he's going.
Yeah, I guess we're all going there. I'm not going to have my body shipped.
Well, you can. We'll trade bodies, whatever you want. Okay.
Hey, man, I rewatched The Producers. It's
been
a while. It's been a while, but I was like, I want to be fresh for this. And oh my God,
I'm glad you're fresh for it. It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Now, what I didn't know is that Mel had already made The Producers back in '60-something, and that was his first movie.
No, the original Producers was back in. Definitely.
Had no idea.
Oh, in fact,
and apparently it was an Oscar-nominated script.
He won an Academy Award on the original Producers for Best Screenplay. The movie didn't have any. There wasn't up for anything else, but it was. It was. See, again, you show your youth every time I talk to you, and I'm showing my age too. But Zero Mostel was in it, and Zero Mostel was one of the biggest guys on Broadway. I mean, he did everything. He was in every major. He was in Fiddler on the Roof. He was the lead in Fiddler on the Roof. He was great. I mean, he's an amazing guy, and he was the lead in The Producers. And
I love him.
Yeah, he's an amazing character. But and Gene Wilder played.
Gene Wilder was in it too. I
played
saw
the Matthew Broderick role.
So he was. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna have to go check that film out.
Oh no, you got to see it. But I mean, it's a simple film. It's 90 minutes. It's quick. It's
does it have
no music?
Okay,
no nothing. No.
Musical
all of that. No. What happened was, I'll give you a little history.
Yeah.
Producers was made, and years and years, people would come to Mel and say, "You got to turn this into a play. It's such a perfect play. It would be great as a play." No, I don't want to do it. I'm not interested. Then people started saying, well, you should make it into a musical. And he said, I don't really want to do that unless I can get a really great composer to do the score. And maybe, a great Broadway, and the person who came to him actually, and this is all true, was David Geffen.
No way.
Yeah. David Geffen said, I'll support you, and let's do this. Let's do it as a musical. Did
he know David from before?
No, look, if you're Mel Brooks, you know everybody in Hollywood.
Well, but at that time, though, it's 60-something, so was he already...
No, I'm not waiting on. No, this didn't happen when The Producers was made. The Producers was made back in the 60s, and it was a success, but this is now 50 years later, 40 years later.
Okay, so this is way later. Okay.
This is probably, let's see, Producers was made in 2005. This is probably in the 1990s.
Okay.
Late 1990s. Gotcha. Geffen is already a billionaire, and he's already, dealing with music and loves music and is involved in the music world. So he happens to run into Mel, and he says, look, you should make this into a musical. And Mel had been, by that point, Mel is not making any more movies, really. I mean, he's done with his directing career.
Yeah.
And he thought about it, and he said, well, as I told you, we said if we can get a great person to write the music, I'd consider it. I'd consider it. So, in any event, Geffen keeps knocking at his door, saying, "You got to do this. You got to do this." And Mel keeps saying, "I'm not sure. I'm not sure." Mel said one thing to me a number of years ago, because we became very good friends long before the producers. I was his assistant director on a movie that he did called High Anxiety, and since then I was friendly with Mel. And so I used to go over his office all the time and we'd talk. And he'd say, you know, people keep asking me to take my old things that I've done and turn them into new things, you know. And he said, when I'm, you know, maybe I'll go into my trunk when I'm in my retirement, deep into my retirement, because that's a way to, you know, monetize some of my old stuff. He says, but I feel like, you know, that's like you're on your way to the grave when you start recycling your old material.
He thinks he still has more new stuff in him.
Yeah, he says so that was his feeling. So, but at this particular time, he was thinking, well, maybe, you know, producer certainly would make a good musical, and he didn't want to write it by himself. He'd been working on the last few films that he did with a guy named Tom Meehan, and Tom Meehan was a playwright, and Tom wrote Annie the musical, and he'd written many wonderful musicals, and Mel and Tom had a really good rapport. They had worked on Spaceballs together. They'd worked on a couple of other movies together. So Mel said, you know, maybe I'll work with Tom and we'll write the book, because he knew that there had to be some changes from the movie that was made back in the 60s.
Right.
So he says, you know, the ending was never quite right. It was, you know, it was funny, and the idea is great, but we can make it even better today. This was his feeling in the, as I said, late 1990s. Anyway, David Geffen has been bugging him, and finally somebody comes to Mel, and Mel is looking at other potential Broadway composers, and I can't really tell you which one it was, and you wouldn't know anyway, but it was from a Broadway musical composer, somebody who was really good, and he was asked to do it and turn it into a musical, and he said, there's only one person who should write the music for this, Mel. So the word gets back to Mel, you should write the music. Nobody else should do that. You should do it. Now, Mel has written songs. He'd written the music. I mean, he wrote the words for Springtime for Hitler for the original. He did that. He's done other, you know, he's written, he did a song for Spaceballs. He did a song for History of the World Part 2. You know, I mean, he'd done a bunch of things. But he never thought of himself really as a composer, although his background he was a drummer, and he was in the Catskill Mountains, and he used to drum, and he you know, a very musical guy, but he hadn't really decided to take it on. Well, when this came back to him, that a major composer thought of him as being the only composer to do this, you know, it was like a challenge. Maybe. It was a challenge to Mel, and you challenge Mel, you're going to get something. So he sat on maybe, and he started thinking about it and thinking, what would be the song breaks in the where in the movie would I have songs? And he figured out the stuff, and he's great at writing lyrics. We knew that. I mean, you know, he's done that because he writes so well, and he's such a wonderful comic genius. So he started doing it. He brought in another music comedy guy named Ronnie Graham. Ronnie Graham had done a lot of Broadway stuff, and Ronnie Graham was a very funny guy. Unfortunately, he's died. But back in the day, when Mel was thinking about this, he said, I'll do it with Ronnie. I'll bounce stuff off Ronnie, and the two of us, you know. So he worked with Ronnie a little bit. Ronnie didn't write the music, but Ronnie was a great, you know, bouncing board. You know, somebody he could talk to and see if it was really working and not. And so he had Ronnie and he had Tom. And he had a piano in his office, and Ronnie could play the piano, so Mel would hum something and Ronnie would play it. And I used to come to the office. Honestly, this was for months. And I would come and just listen. I'd sit in the corner and hear, and they'd be trying stuff out and working out songs and stuff like that. And it was, you know, he was coming up with great stuff. I mean, it was really, really good. Tom who is a book writer. He's not a musician, but he's a great book writer and very funny also, could take Mel's jokes and help put them in the form of a screenplay. So they they did all this stuff and they worked together. And by this time, Geffen's busy on other things, and he'd been asking Mel so many times. Mel said, "Hey, I like Geffen, but I don't really need him. I mean, I'm not looking for him to fund it."
Right.
Initially, he was, but he said, maybe I just do this. I'll write it, and I'll see if anybody's interested in buying it. If Geffen wants to come in at that point, fine. But I don't need anybody telling me how to do what I do. I just want to do it. And when I'm done, if it looks like something good, we'll take it and we'll see if we can sell it.
Yeah.
So that is essentially the story of how the musical started to happen.
Now, was it an actual live musical, or did it just go straight to the musical film?
No. It was a live musical on Broadway. It was an enormous hit. It was one of the biggest hits on Broadway.
See,
again, this is a guy who was out of town. He was out of town in those years.
I was out of the country in those years.
All right, let me give you a sense of what happened.
Yeah.
He puts this thing together and did what they call a backers audition in New York. And Geffen, again, was interested in funding it. And Mel said, well, I'll give you a shot at it, but I can't guarantee that you're going to get it, and he, Mel came to me during that time and he said, I'm worried. I think I may be throwing the billionaire out with the bathwater. So I said, no, but he said, but no, he'll still have a crack at it, but I'm not going to guarantee that he gets it. Anyway, Geffen, I don't know exactly what happened, but he might have been a little miffed, and he said, "Go with God, do your own thing.
Own way, then.
I'll, thank you, but I'm not interested anymore."
Yeah.
So Mel said, "Okay," and he took the thing and went to New York, did what they call a backers audition, where you get the actors in, they sing the songs, they talk through the dialogue, they go through the whole thing, and at the end of the evening, the backers who were watching get to bid on it if they like it.
Backers audition, I get it. So for financiers,
and
basically.
you have to know, in Broadway, there are really only 3 major Broadway companies. Now there's 4. Disney has become a Broadway company, but they never were. It was the Schubert brothers. There was the Nederlanders and Drew Jamson. Those 3 companies owned almost every theater in New York, every musical theater for sure, and the only other one has been Disney, who's come in. When they did Lion King, they started buying theaters too, so they wound up becoming, but they only do their own stuff. Whereas the other 3, everything else you see on Broadway is usually in a Nederlander theater, a Drew Jamson theater, or a Schubert theater. Schubert being the biggest. Schubert has the most theaters, okay? So Mel is in New York. He does a backers audition. He has representatives from Schubert, Nederlander, Drew Jamson. Drew Jamson has the least number of theaters, but some of the best theaters. And they're really, really, forward-seeing guys, the people who are running it. So Mel basically plays the thing, and before they're halfway through, and there's a slight intermission. The head of Drew Jamson comes over to Mel and says, "We want to preempt everybody else. We want to buy this right now." So Mel says, "Well, what theater are you going to put it in?" Because he knows the theaters. He knows, and he wants the St. James Theater, which is the best Broadway house for this musical, without a doubt. But you can never pick the theaters you want usually. I mean, it's not, they're busy or they're running for years the same show. Yeah. Anyway, they own that theater. And the head of Drew Jamson says to Mel, "Tell you what, if you sign with us, we'll put the show in the St. James Theater." And the bidding was over.
Done. Yeah.
They sold. He let them fund the show and put it in. Now the show is not inexpensive. You're talking about at least a $15 million investment. Not a problem. Raising the money was not an issue once you got a theater that wants it and is going to put all that money into it during the run of it. They don't necessarily finance the whole movie, but they would put in some money, and he could get the rest of it. It was no problem getting other Broadway investors.
Yeah, of course.
So he puts the show up, and they put it on Broadway. It winds up being the show that won the most Tony Awards in history. It won, I think it was up for 13, and I think it won 12. It was like up for everything.
I
So
feel like I should go bury myself.
I go to New York to see the opening. Mel invites me because I've been hanging out, watching the show, and hanging out with him. And he says, "No, you got to come see the show." I go into the theater in New York. The show is on. Mel's not directing it. He's got Susan Stroman, who's a fantastic
Directed the film,
choreographer, director, and she's directing the show on Broadway. And he loves her, and he's totally behind her. And he's nowhere to be seen. Mel is not there. The show is running. I'm invited. Big audience, terrific show. I mean, it is a riot. People are applauding. It's the biggest thing you ever saw. And this was before it won all the awards, but we saw it. This was literally the first night it ran. And I look in the back of the theater, and there's like a little staircase in the back. And Mel is sitting up on the top of the staircase, hiding in the back, just listening to, doesn't want anyone to know he's there, but he's there. He's there. And he probably was there most of the early nights, probably every night. But he was always in the back, kind of hiding, just watching the audience to see how the audience was responding to the show. So, are we still on? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So, in any event, the show became an enormous hit. The day after the show was on, Mel has invited me to have lunch with him and Tom Meehan. He goes to a place where they make great omelets on the east side, not too far from where he lives. He says, "No, meet me there." I said, So I go there, and I had said to him, let me, preface the lunch with what I said to him after I saw the show. I went over to him and I said, "Mel, if you turn this into a movie, I have to produce it."
Yeah.
So he says, "Yeah, we'll talk tomorrow." I said, "Hey, come to lunch." So okay, I come to lunch. I'm having lunch with him and Tom Meehan, and he says, "Okay, kid." I was kid.
Yeah.
He says, "Kid, you and I, we're gonna produce this together as a movie." I said, "Okay." He says, "No, I know you do. You handle all the mechanics, and I'll take care of everything else, and we're gonna do this together." So I said, "Where are we gonna do? What are we gonna do with it?" He said, "Well, let's let the show run a little bit." He said, "But I think we should have meetings with all of the studios, and we'll see who gives us the best deal."
Yeah.
Okay. So I go back home. I'm back in LA. I'm doing my own thing, doing other things. The show is running. The show is tremendously successful. It sounds like a good idea to make this into a movie at some point. So as the show is going and going, finally Mel comes home to LA, and he calls me into his office, and he says, "Okay, we have our first lunch tomorrow. We're meeting with the heads of Universal Studios." Okay, he said, "We're going to have lunch with them." He would literally choreograph the meeting. So he'd tell me, "This is what we're going to do. It's going to be you, me, and my lawyer, Alan Schwartz, who I knew very well too." He says, "We're going to go to lunch with them." He says, "And they're going to offer us to take the show from us and put it on and make a movie out of it, and we're going to say no." I said, "No?" He says, "Yeah, we're going to say no." He says, "We don't want them to own the movie, so we're going to offer them domestic distribution only. So let's let them pitch us, but ultimately we're only going to accept domestic distribution because I want to keep foreign separate, and I want to sell that to somebody else." Okay. Like he had predicted it. We go in there. They want the show. They want to make a movie of it. Mel doesn't immediately say no. He says, "Well, it's got to be Nathan Lane. You can't go with another actor. I don't want to go with another actor. I want it Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick. They have to be the leads." No, of course.
They were in the play?
They were in the play.
Okay.
They started the play. He says, "We want them in the play. So, we may talk about some of the other characters by putting in name actors, but not those parts. Those have to be those guys." Okay, we're fine with that. The studio was okay. They're not big movie names necessarily.
Had he already done Ferris Bueller at that point?
Oh yeah, no, Matthew was a good movie name, but when I say
he wasn't Tom Cruise.
He wasn't Tom Cruise. He wasn't Tom Hanks. He wasn't that guy, but he was good. I mean, he didn't hurt you at the box office, but he didn't also mean that people are automatically going to go see a Matthew Broderick movie. Okay, so we have that, and after we get through the whole thing, and they pitched us and they won it, and they said, well, what do you guys think? And we were, Mel had kind of said, don't say anything right away. I'll take that, I'll take it from here. Mm-hmm. So he did, and he said, look, we're not really interested in, we only want you to have the domestic rights. We'll give it to you for the U.S. and Canada, but that's it. Okay. I mean, they said, look, if that's what you want, that's what we'll take. We'd like the world, but we'll take just the U.S. and Canada. And that was how it got started. We knew that we had a domestic distributor, and they said they would put in half the budget. Whatever the budget was. I mean, not whatever the budget was. The budget was, I think, at that point, it was about $40 million it was going to cost. And they'd put up 20. At least, maybe a little more than.
So you already have the screenplay or not yet?
No, we just had the play.
Yeah.
No, the screenplay was going to be adapted from the play, but you had all the songs. Everything that was in the play was going to be in the movie. Right. So
it wasn't a huge.
No, it had to be redesigned for movie, but not in a major way.
Okay.
And the other thing is, when you make a movie out of a play, you try to open it up a little bit. So we have a scene in Central Park with the old ladies. That obviously wasn't in Central Park. That's somewhere else. And maybe it was Central Park and it just said Central Park, but it was on a stage. We did it really in Central Park. We had people in the city. We used the city as much as we could, and we used a number of exteriors and other locations in New York to be the locations that we would never have been able to build if we had to build them on stage. Sure. But we did build, the one thing we did do was Schubert Alley and the whole street. We were thinking of actually shooting on the real street, but it would have taken tremendous amount of work. We would have, to bring it back to the 1960s and all that would have been really hard. So we wound up bringing in a designer and, literally building the entire street. It was a very expensive set. But
was that
we used it all the time.
Or
no, we did it in New York at Steiner Studios, which is was a brand new studio at that time, and it was in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Brooklyn, and we had their largest 2 stages, and in their largest 2 stages we built the whole street and all of them.
So he called the play like what is this, Bowman, the coach, where he's like talking to in Without Limits, he's telling him you shave 6 seconds off by. So Mel's doing that for the Universal meeting, saying they're going to say this, we're going to do that. That actually happens. Where'd you get the other half of the money?
Well, the other half of the money, we had a couple of options. We had a foreign sales company that very much wanted it, would easily have given us the other half for all the foreign territories, and their deal was very good. I honestly, I can't remember the name of the company right now, but it's still a major company in foreign sales. But we also got an offer from Sony, which is a major studio that also does domestic. Mm-hmm. They said, we'll just take foreign, and we'll do foreign completely. Now, when you use a foreign sales company, like the other company we might have used, they sell it separately in each territory, and they get the best amount that they can from each territory. The likelihood of them probably doing a better job than Sony was pretty good, because they were dealing with the best distributors in each territory, and they can deal with each one of them separately. Mm-hmm. So they make the absolute best deal. Sony has its own distributors that it uses some of these other distributors, but they already have their deals in place, and they take the whole world. So if they lose in one territory, they'll make a little more in another. They're not as driven as a sales company to make the absolute best deal.
Yeah.
But, and there's a big but here, Mel is in some sense, as far-seeing as he is, he's a traditionalist, and he said, you know, the difference between these two deals, we might do better with the foreign sales company. But remember, we have to pay, through the foreign sales company, we have to pay royalties. We have to keep track of everything they do for years. What if they disappear? What if they have a bad year and they go under and they're gone?
Yeah.
We don't have anybody to rely on, whereas
Sony's
not going anywhere.
They have other products.
Yeah,
to
they got
business.
plenty of stuff, and
Right.
they're not going anywhere.
Right.
So if they take the project, we will feel I will feel much more comfortable that when it comes to paying, they don't have to collect from each individual exhibitor. They have the power to force exhibitors to pay them, and we'll get our money back. We'll get the money that we are supposed to get. So we ultimately went with Sony. So the deal was Sony had foreign, and Universal had domestic, and that basically covered 99% of the budget. I mean, and we still had a small percentage left over.
If Geffen wanted to jump back in.
Well, Geffen wouldn't have,
No, I
because
know.
it was too small for. He would have wanted a
of
much
course.
bigger piece. Mel paid for it himself. He said, "I'm going to put up the any balance in between," which he did, and it gave him, in a way, it kind of gave him skin in the game. He felt like, I'm an investor too.
Yeah.
So they can't tell me, hey, we're the investors, we're supporting this. You're just the artist.
Yeah.
He said, no, I'm also an investor, and I'm going to care just as much about the outcome as you. My own money's at risk. Your money's at risk. It made sense. And so he went in, and that was how we did it. And that's how we made the movie.
So what did the movie make ultimately after?
Well, it's
theatrical?
hard to say, because a movie like that has a long tail. Which
Let's
means,
just say the theatrical run, right? Like not any other.
No, I'm talking about the theatrical run even. I mean, it did well. It didn't do extraordinarily well. And we couldn't really understand it, because the play had done, well, we did understand it, I mean, ultimately. But initially we looked at it and we said, boy, this should have done better. I mean, it did, it was an expensive movie. And Mel kept wanting us to make it for less. But really, to make the movie that we wanted to make, and he wanted to make, it cost what it cost. I mean, you can't, there were no corners we could cut to bring it down. It's a period piece. It's big. You want the action. You want it to be bigger than a theater piece.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Mel kept saying to me, he says, look, and he said this early, he says, maybe we just film the play. So I said, yeah, you can film the play, but it's, that's not going to be, it's definitely not going to get the same kind of response. So we worked our way up to what it ultimately became, and I think he was a little unsure. He wasn't sure about it, but we did it, and the movie, as I said, did not do tremendous box office business. When I say that, I mean it didn't do enough in its initial takeoff to guarantee that everyone would get their money back, and that's a big number. But over the course of time, it definitely did. It made its money back. He got his money back. Nobody was hurt at Universal. Nobody was hurt at Sony. Everybody got paid their money back. We didn't make tremendous profits on the movie. That never happened. But
the play was raking it in.
The movie is there. The play was raking it in everywhere. So Mel wasn't concerned. In fact, the play, a hit play like that, actually can make more money than any movie that you can imagine. I mean, because you're getting paid you're getting a gross audience pay. Every night there's an audience watching that theater. Let's say there are 3,000 people in the theater, and each one is paying $150 a ticket or more.
It's big, yeah.
Once you take out the cost of running it, which is not nothing, but it's not anything close to those numbers, the rest of it goes to the financiers, the director, the producer. Mel having written the music, he gets a payment for that every night. He gets a royalty. He gets a royalty for being a producer on it. He gets a royalty for co-writing the book. Mel was doing just fine.
Yeah.
And you have to understand, that's just one theater. When the play goes into multiple theaters or on tour or around the world, every different theater it plays in, he gets a piece of every ticket that is sold. That's incredible.
Right.
I mean, a play like that can make $1 billion.
Yeah, and I mean, and it can run for decades.
And it can run, and it keeps running. I mean, if you think about that, right now on Broadway, there's a play, Wicked. Wicked, I can't even imagine how much money Wicked has made. It's been running for 12, 13 years, and it runs everywhere else. It's running in Canada. It's running in Australia. It's running all over. Every theater that it runs in, the producers of that movie are getting a check.
Yeah.
So it's enormous. I mean, another play like that was when you think of the Jersey Boys. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but the Jersey Boys made $1 billion.
Cats was like that too, right?
Made $1 billion. No, Cats did great. But I mean, if a Broadway show is a hit, a big hit, particularly a musical, it stands to do better than any movie you'll ever see, pretty much. I mean,
especially
the ABBA musical. What do you call it?
I know.
That's made over $1 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, these are huge things. That's why Disney, Lion King you can't even count the amount of money Lion King has made in the number of theaters it's played in and the number of years it's been running, and it continues to do so. So that is, if you have a piece of Lion King, you don't need to do anything else in your life and in your next life and in your family's life. Those shows last forever. They're evergreen and they run forever. No. So now the other thing about Broadway plays is maybe 1 in 20, even I would say 1 in 15 or 20 actually does more than break even. So the number of hits are very small. So the people who make the big money are a minuscule percentage.
And there's only so much inventory that you can release. It's not like a movie where you can say, all right, well, there's a lot of opportunities and ways to show this. There are a number of theaters, and
you show it in the theaters. Anyway, the big thing about that is what I was driving at is the fact that it's an amazing. When you have a hit in that world, it's the biggest thing in your life, and in that respect, the movie could never compete with the play in that sense. But the movie came out, and the movie was a lot of fun. Now, one of the reasons we feel that the movie didn't do, because you asked the question, and a lot of people ask the question, why didn't it do the business the theater was doing so well? Well, the theater audience is an older audience, generally an older audience. It's usually 40s and 50s and 60s. I mean, age. It's not it's not necessarily a big thing for teenagers and young kids. They don't go to the theater. They watch movies. Now, that's the difference. It's a different audience. So when you run it as a movie, you're still playing the same show, which really appeals to the older audience, which doesn't go to the movies as much as the younger audience, and they're not that interested in the producers. They're interested in, slam bang, Marvel stuff, heroes and comic books. So it limited its appeal as a film, even as it increased its appeal as a play. Yeah. But that's just the way things are in the different worlds of theater and movies.
Yeah. And I saw you in the movie.
You did.
You were in the audience at the finale of
Yes, I was.
I just like, wait, that's Jonathan
unbelievable that you saw
up.
me. Well, there's another thing. What I did for that, and this was an interesting thing. Normally, you got to fill a theater with a lot of people, and they're all extras, but they get paid, and they get paid a fair amount of money, and you got to keep them around. And
feed them all.
I needed, I had to get like 2,000 people.
Yeah, well,
2,000 people is a big chunk of money.
Yeah.
Well, I had a friend in New York who said to me, "What are you going to do about the audience?" And I said, "Well, I gotta hire them." He says, "I got a better idea," because we had this was while we were in preparation. He knew we were going to have to do this, so he said to me, "What if I make it a fundraiser, and I tell people if they have a tuxedo, and they can be in this movie, and they pay us to be in the movie,
Nice.
and they get to sit in the audience." I said, "Well, they're going to get bored." I said, "You don't understand. They're going to have to be there all day." I mean, So he and the fact is, when we shoot the audience, the stuff that's on the stage isn't really on the stage. That we've shot separately in a studio. So we're just shooting from the stage down to the audience and getting reactions from them that will fit in with the stuff we shot somewhere else. who's going to want to sit all day? And so, but then we thought about it and we said, well, it's a day of shooting. We have actors. We have Mel Brooks. We have Nathan Lane. We have Matthew Broderick. We have, Will Ferrell. We have Uma Thurman. Why don't we invite them down? Each one comes for 20 minutes or a half an hour and talks to the audience.
Oh, that's fun.
So we spread it out all over the day.
Brilliant.
We had them come in and do a little. Mel did hours worth of talking because he was around the whole time, but we wound up using our talent just to warm up our audience and keep them there.
Yeah.
And we wound up, not only didn't we have to pay for the audience, but they paid us. We had to dress some of them. I mean, the women wouldn't have the right clothes.
Right.
So we wound up, our wardrobe people had to bring racks and racks of clothes, which were just outside, in the lobby of the theater, and we would dress people in these in these costumes. But tuxedos, if it was a traditional tuxedo, they looked pretty much the same. No one really was paying attention. So we had men in tuxedos, and I had lots of people in the audience who were either friends of ours or people that we knew or people who just paid to be in there.
Well, that didn't only probably save you about $1 million. It added
saved us a lot of money.
I mean, that's what, $300 a day per person.
Yeah, probably.
Extra, right?
Yeah, and you're talking about 3,000 people.
3,000 people. You
couple
got
of
to feed
days.
them, and you still have to do wardrobe.
Yeah.
You still have to get them to dress them. So that's brilliant.
So it was a big deal, and it taught me a lesson too. That if you have time to plan it, you can pull something off pretty interesting. I mean, you couldn't do it with any show, but this particular, because the producers was so well known as a play by the older audiences, they wanted to be in the movie.
Yeah.
So you could get them to do it. If you just said we need you to be in a scene with an audience in some horror film, you're not going to get them to pay to be in it. But this was a special moment.
With a couple goodies like that, with having that cast also.
Well, we also,
that's
I
great.
mean, and the guy who did it also had a raffle going so that people could get things if they were, how
much did they pay? Do you know, each person roughly?
They didn't pay. How much did they pay?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it was, but it didn't matter. I mean, it wasn't money that was going to go to the production. We made it clear that any money that they paid would go to a charity.
Oh, that's great. So
we
you
made
raised money
it
for
a charitable
charity,
thing,
and
we
you
saved $1 million.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that was the deal.
Good. That's good producing right there.
Well, sometimes you get lucky, and that was definitely one of those moments. But it was a fun movie to make, hard movie. I mean, I must say, there's a lot hard there. I mean, the main scenes that took place on the street and in and around the exterior of the theaters were all on stage, and it was this incredible set that was built over a long period of time and was very expensive, I have to say, but probably much less expensive than any other way we could have shot it. So, we did that. And as I was saying before, we shot outside. We shot the scene in the scene where unhappy, they're all working with their
the accountants.
The accountants.
Yeah.
That big accountant scene was done downtown New York in an old bank that actually just was empty, but it had the walls and everything, and we put in the tables and the adding machines and just filled it with people, and that was great fun.
And John Lovitz came in and did that thing. You had a bunch of little cameos that were kind of fun. Even in the end, I forget the guy's name. He comes in and it's like, it's
Michael. I can't think of his name, but he plays one of the prisoners in the end of it.
So are these just people who live in New York and they came down for that?
They're people who live in New York, and we just asked our casting director, would you want to be in the producers just for a day and stuff like that? And we paid them scale. I mean, we didn't pay them big money. We couldn't, but they all wanted to be in it, and it was just a fun thing. So we got them down, and they came. And they worked. So we got them to do that.
Lovitz was a good choice for that.
Lovitz was great. Lovitz was just a day. It was a perfect day.
Certified public asshole. That's called. But every once in a while you watch a Mel Brooks film, and you just if you catch the little, sometimes his writing, and I'm not one to gush over writing and this and that, but it is cool when you watch somebody who's that refined and you look at it through, you know, a producer's kind of eyes as well, trying to, you know, I was like analyzing and breaking down films, like, oh, what are they trying to do here? What are they saying? And how are they covering it? But what's funny about Mel is like sometimes these little throwaway lines the characters say, they're brilliant. I can't think of the one I'm thinking about right now, but something happened where somebody just says something and somebody says something else, and it was like poetry, that little thing. But it was just a quick moment.
Well, you know,
and it's full of that stuff.
You know, a lot of it did come from the actors themselves, where the actors,
Oh, that's nice.
I mean, if they got in a rhythm with Mel. Now, Mel was there a lot of the time. Wasn't there all the time, but I was there all the time. I had to be there every day, every minute while they were shooting. And I became close to Susan, and Susan was fantastic. I mean, this is somebody who had never directed a movie before, but she knew, you know, this was not somebody who was tentative about what she wanted. She knew what she wanted. She knew what she wanted to see, and she was a great commander of the set, which was great. And I mean, there were things she didn't know, and she learned. You know, I mean, she's a quick learner, and also has a great sense of humor. So she knew. I mean, she created all of the physical jokes that existed in the movie, and also in the play. She was responsible for a lot of those. I mean, for example, the whole accountant, that whole scene came out of. I mean, the idea was Mel's and everything, but the actual execution of it and the way it played was funny, and that was her.
That was very funny.
Or how, you know, doing down the line of the where the accountant is talking to all the different girls, you, not you, you know, that thing.
Yeah, where they come out of the
and they come out of the all of that design and fun was stuff that Susan created. All of the design of the that fantasy sequence with all of the dancers, and as he, you know, I want to be a producer. That was all Susan, and it was great. It was Susan. And anybody who knows historical musicals will know that the big MGM musicals of the 50s, things like Singing in the Rain and all of those big musicals, It's Always Fair Weather, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, all of those things. One of the biggest directors of all of those was Stanley Donen, who was an amazing, you know, Stanley did a lot of other things, but I had worked with Stanley Donen years ago. I had been his assistant director and production manager on a movie that he did many years ago, and he was in New York. Now, he was probably in his 80s at the time, and I was talking to him. I had dinner with him, and he said, boy, I'd love to see what they're doing. Well, I invited him to come to the set on the day we were doing the big number with all of the dancers, because he had been a dancer, and that was his specialty, those kinds of scenes. So I thought he would really appreciate it, and I brought him down to the stage in Brooklyn, which was, you know, and introduced him to Susan, he was a great hero to her, so it was great for her to meet him. And he just, you know, he couldn't believe it. I mean, he was looking at stuff that he knew what it cost. You know, he knew in his day they didn't have that kind of money, you know, but it was really fantastic, and he led
did have a lot of that vibe. I mean, it was, I have to say, it was well executed as a music. I didn't realize it was an actual musical, so that makes a little bit more sense. But I thought, like, wow, they really put a lot into the songs here for this and the numbers, and it did remind me a lot of kind of an MGM film from the 60s. But I was also going to say some of the framing, and, you know, it's almost like that accountant scene. It's almost kind of like a Wes Anderson shot. Like, it has that kind of symmetry to it and everything. It really all plays very nice.
Well, I think that was, to me, like, it's interesting you mentioned Wes Anderson, because I love he has a kind of a formality in the shots that he selects that is unlike anybody else. And it's really fantastic, and yet in some ways feels a little old-fashioned and a little and also very modern at the same time. And that's a unique thing. In our case, you know, we had a comedy that had been very funny in the 60s, but we had to keep up with the times, try to make it as much of an experience as it could be. And we had, you know, Nathan and Matthew are two of the funniest human beings on the planet.
Yeah.
So it was great to work with them.
They are. And then how did Will Ferrell and Uma Thurman come in?
Well, again, there's you asked the right question. I mean, when you're getting to make a movie, the studio does have, I mean, it wasn't that we would have hired somebody who wasn't known at all, or somebody out of the theater. But it was an issue, you know. I mean, there were a lot of people who were in the musical play who thought they should be in the movie. And unfortunately, Mel, as much as anybody else, knew that we needed some stars, some names that had some name value. Will Ferrell was first. And Will Ferrell...
He'd just done Anchorman, right? Or
he hadn't... I don't know if he'd done Anchorman yet. He was just about to do the
Talladega Nights?
Talladega Nights.
Yeah.
Right after that, he did Talladega Nights. But Will, when we offered it to him, he was tickled by the idea of playing this crazy character, and he loved Mel. So he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." So he came in, and once we had him, the question was whether we were going to use the woman who did it on Broadway, who was great and won a Tony for it, or whether we were going to go out and find somebody else. And sad to say, I mean, certainly from the play side, because the woman who played it in New York was fantastic, but she almost, in a way, kind of aged out of the part. You know, she was... in a movie, when you are doing an extreme close-up, you can't say somebody is 19 who's 30.
Stage is fine.
And I'm not talking about she didn't look like she was 60. She looked like she was older than the character was supposed to play. And I mean, but the main reason, really, even more than that, was the notion of having a name that meant something to an audience on a poster, on a, you know, people say, "Oh, Uma Thurman's in it." Yeah, we've seen, you know, she was in, you know, Quentin Tarantino's movie or stuff like that. You know, we know she is.
Right.
So that was kind of the reason. And
whose idea was it? The casting director to talk to Will, or was that like something you guys?
No, we talked to it together. I mean, I think those at that level, those kind of parts were. I mean, the casting
there was
director,
only a handful of eligible people anyway.
The casting director was interested in helping us with that, but we were very much. I mean, Mel, myself, Susan, you know, even Tom, me, and were very much involved in making the decision about, you know, who we would go after and whether or not. And if it got to the place where we had to make a special phone call, Mel usually made the call because he was able to get people on the phone immediately without having to go through their agents first. You know, if we went to their agents, it would have been a different story. Once Will told his agent, "I want to play this," it was a little easier.
Yeah, but the agent saying, "Hey, you want to play a crazed former Nazi?"
No, well, that would have been one thing, and the other thing was if you go to the agent first, he'd come back with some insane number that you couldn't afford
because he knows the success of the producers.
So Will, on the other hand, was it was just a limited commitment of time. He thought it was fun. He came up with some wonderful ad libs and things, but he was great, you know, and that was it.
I hear more stories of great casting being done intentionally by circumventing the agents because there are just constantly issues with.
I mean,
I don't want to poo-poo on agents too much, but
no. I mean, there's some agents who are great.
Yeah.
And but a lot of them are basically, you know,
But
how much
the
is the
Elephant
only
Man,
thing they care about. Yeah.
Anthony Hopkins, agent didn't even pass the script along or
Well-
wasn't going to, right?
No, this is, look, but what I mean, in my career, because most of these movies are independent movies, and you know, I mean, you may not think of it as an independent movie, the producers, because Universal was the distributor, but it was an independent movie. It's not owned by them.
Yeah.
It's owned by Mel's company, and they put up the money. You know, I mean, they have licenses to run it for many, many, many years. But it's a little different than if it was their movie from the outset, and they, you know, and this wasn't the case. So we had a little bit of leeway, but you know, they would definitely have ideas, but we didn't have people from the studio looking over our shoulder telling us what to do. I mean, Mel was enough. You know, we didn't need anybody else.
Yeah. You think you can make a movie like this today?
Well, I didn't think I could make a movie
Yeah.
like that in 2005.
But
so
even
you never
just
know.
like the characters and the choice of, like I love that stuff. I don't take it too seriously, but it seems like climate wise, you're taking a lot of stabs at different,
look,
I think it's hilarious, but
I think
there's a lot of people out there hating on stuff like that right now.
that's true. I mean, that may be true. I mean, I think funny is funny, and it doesn't matter. I mean, if you don't, go in the face of going in the face of authority is a big comic aspect of comedy always. I mean, if you look at the late night comics and the Daily Show type people and stuff like that, they're always poking their finger at what's going on in the world. It's less so in the movies because they have to stand up to a little more variety in terms of the audience. I mean, you don't just want to get an audience that is liberal, radicalized. You want to take it out into the hinterlands, and you might find a much more conservative audience. And can you play to that audience and still make them enjoy it? I mean, the thing is, the very idea of Springtime for Hitler, when the original movie was made, was a totally different event than when the musical was made. If you think about it, in the early 60s, we're maybe 20 years, 20 years at most from the death of Hitler.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about people out there
They're still
who don't
remembering.
are still suffering, and many survivors and all that. So to do that, to come up with that notion, was a very brave and scary kind of a thing, and it was the braveness and scariness of it that made it so funny. I mean, a lot of people said, "How could you do that?" But a lot of other people said, "Wow, I mean, if you wanted to find a way, and that's what the movie's about, you want to find a way to make a movie that's going to be guaranteed to fail." Make a movie about Hitler, in Jewish New York, now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole idea of the movie.
In
The
an
idea is,
endearing, empathetic way.
but they want to make it fail. The whole idea of the movie is it has to fail.
Right.
How do we guarantee it fails?
Yeah.
Do the most outrageous thing you can.
Insulting, offensive,
Yeah.
horrible, terrible directing, terrible everything. But,
And it makes sense, but at the original time it was done, it was still a much sorer subject.
Yeah.
By the time we got to make it as a movie, the soreness kind of wore
you could
off.
do the gay
Yeah.
musical number.
Yeah, you
that
could
comes
exactly.
after that,
You could make fun of
Right.
fun of gays. You could make fun of Hitler. You could do, because everybody bought into that. I mean, they were. It's only if people were taking it so seriously, they said, "Oh my God, how could you do that?" Well, that was what I mean. Mel's whole sense of humor is based on basically going in the face of what is traditional. Think about it. I'll tell you, in the 2,000-year-old man, which I don't know if you ever heard, but this is one of the greatest comic bits that was ever done, and it was Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, and Mel plays the 2,000-year-old man, and he's talking about the difference between Christianity and Judaism, and he says, he talked about the fact that if you were gonna for the Jews, he said he would make these Jewish stars. He said, and the way he had to make Jewish stars was he'd have 6 men, each with a point, running together at very high speeds, and they'd bond at the high speeds, and bang, you'd have a Jewish star. He said, but you had a problem. You didn't make many because of the many accidents. This is what he would say. He says, what I didn't realize, he said, somebody came to me with this other item. He says, it was called a cross. He says, I looked at it. I turned it over. I did. It's too simple. I said, it's too simple. I didn't know then it was eloquent. That's what he says. Okay. He says, think about it. 2 men run together, bang, you got a cross. I could have had money today.
Right.
I mean, the idea of that joke is it offensive to Catholics? Is it offensive to Jews? Maybe, but it's meant to poke fun at both.
I think what I was Mel, I think it's all comedy's always in the execution, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can get away with murder if you know how to deliver it. And I think Mel is one of those guys who can be very offensive if you were to say it even slightly differently. But the way it's delivered and the way his writing is, it works. Because Hitler comes up, and you even see it in the play, and this is why it turns into a hit also in the movie, right? That the original actor who would have been very rah Hitler that broke his leg literally after saying break a leg, which is again one of those Mel puns, right? Like, you say break a leg, ow, I broke my leg, and then the director comes on, and he is as flamboyant as can be, and then that adds this layer of warmth and humor to it, and suddenly Hitler becomes kind of a joke, but in a kind of an endearing way, and it was well, it's very it's an art to really be able to be that on the edge and still keep things manageable.
Well, you asked me a good question the other time about, could you make this movie today? A movie you probably would have a very hard time making today would be Blazing Saddles, because Blazing Saddles is about a black, the black. I mean, we're still very edgy and uncomfortable about that, even though it's very funny and people watch it today and still think it's funny. But could you make that movie today? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and that's the other question too. A script is not the movie, and so I'm sure if you were to read Springtime for Hitler or the producers as a script right now, and you had no context, you didn't know who Mel Brooks was, what his thing is, and you just read the script. I don't know. and Blazing Saddles too.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
This is like, we can't do this. This is crazy. Oh, you're nuts.
No, but it had to be. Yeah. I mean, the thing was, it became Mel's brand. Yeah, that's who he was. And the producers, the original producers, was the first example of that. That was where people began to see who Mel was. That was the first movie he made. And then from that movie, he developed his brand. By the time he made Blazing Saddles, people might have been a little more ready for him, And,
so if the producers was his first movie,
it was.
How did what was he doing before that?
Mel was writing comedy for television. He wrote for Sid Caesar, and he wrote. There were two major series. Again, this is you were out of the country, so you weren't around if you even existed. But there was a show called Your Show of Shows in the early '50s, which was with Sid Caesar. It was a comedy variety show, which was the funniest thing on television. And then after a few years, when it finally ran its course, the network then put, I think it was NBC, then put on Caesar's Hour, which was with a lot of the same people, and Mel wrote for that. And that was where Mel started. Mel was a kid, but he was one of the young writers on that, and always the most outrageous, always with the craziest ideas, always the stuff that made the other writers laugh. I mean, the other writers were serious guys, but Mel he may have been serious, but he made them laugh, and that was his way in. And then he went on and on to become the brand, which became Mel Brooks.
That's great. Think it was hard for him to get that first movie off the ground? I mean, he's just a writer at that point.
It was
and he got Gene Wilder on it.
No, it was hard. He was married at the time. He was married to Anne Bancroft, and she was a much bigger star and a much bigger personality than he was. And she was friendly with Gene Wilder. She knew Gene Wilder.
Oh, so she helped.
So she helped him get Gene.
Our beautiful wives.
He didn't know, it was Joseph E. Levine, who was an independent major producer who had lots of money, who wound up being the backer. His company backed that movie, and it was a very inexpensive movie, even for its time. I'm sure the movie cost under $1 million, complete, everything. And it was, but it was outrageous, and it was funny, and it brought, and the concept of it was so clever that it brought Mel into great prominence. And from that point on, he stayed prominent.
I mean, it's a brilliant, simple concept, but it's really fun. Do you have any idea how he came up with that idea of this failing producer? That
I think he knew that in theater, that is the way it
is
is.
the
You
thing.
know, you invest in, the show may open and close in a night. You know, you have no, and then you lose 100% of your investment. So if you didn't spend all of your investment,
if
that
you
was the
knew it
idea.
was gonna happen.
You raise lots of money from lots of people, and then you lose it all, but you really haven't lost it all. You wind up keeping the balance, and everybody knows that they invested in a failed show. That is the idea. And of course, the failed show becomes a hit, and the guys have to figure out how are we going to pay these people. You know, so
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very clever notion, the whole thing.
Love it. Okay, well,
think,
this is good. I think we're about at the
Yeah, I
end
think
of
we're
it,
about
right?
done. Yeah,
This was a good one. And okay, we'll think
we'll
about
keep
what to
it
do
going.
next.
We'll see what the next one's going to be.
Okay, man.
Thank you.
I thought I had seen Vanilla Sky.
Uh-huh.
Turns out I didn't.
Oh, there's a movie called Abre los Ojos, which is a Spanish movie. Penelope Cruz was in it. It's the same exact story as Vanilla Sky, and it was done before Vanilla Sky. And it's called Abre los Ojos, meaning open your eyes.